Yeah, let's do it. And welcome back, fellow football fanatics. It's been a minute. I You could probably hear me backstage a little bit. Um but yeah, I'm excited to be back. There's a few developments that I want to share with you guys that um I'll be able to share with you next week. Right now I can't share them, but there will be some changes. There are some things behind the scenes of the channel that I am very happy about. So I'm excited. I feel like there's some more life in the channel. I don't feel as burned out as I did for really these past, I guess, 2 weeks, you could say. But there is a lot going on here. So today we're going to be discussing anything from National Signing Day to recruiting to championship games and championship week and some more of what I think about that. But first, I think it's appropriate to say welcome in. Thank you to LSU vs Far. Thank you to Moody Meatball, to DeMarcus Carter, to FUJSM6467, to SPC Pittsburgh, and to esoteric something. Thank you for being some initial viewers on the show and for tuning in right now. Hopefully, we can somehow get to 100 or 200 concurrent viewers today. High flying energy is what I have right now. I'm happy. I'm excited. Next show we will have is Sunday, of course, is the final show of the week. If you have anything you want to say and you want me to respond to it, I am on a time crunch, but I will try to get to Super Chats today. Nonetheless, let's kick it off by talking about a few teams that I really wanted to touch on in reaction to not just this past weekend, but just how their season went. So for Nebraska, that's where we're going to start off here. We're talking about Nebraska, Iowa, Michigan, and Ohio State, the two rivalry games that we covered. I have deep concerns for Nebraska. Now, what do I mean by deep concerns? Do I think that Matt Rule isn't going to make it, that he isn't the guy to revive Nebraska? Do I think he's done a poor job? Not necessarily. I actually think that he's done a good job at Nebraska, and I'm still optimistic about his future with the Cornhuskers, but that doesn't mean that I don't have concerns or that I don't have reservations. What happened on Saturday is bigger than just a game. It is more than just a loss. What happened Saturday was the curtains were peeled back, the veil was torn, and right before our eyes, we got to see that Nebraska is a ways away from where they want to be. And also, our foundation as college football fans, my own from an analyst perspective, and I think especially as Nebraska fans, our foundation got shook in the sense that we believed that Matt Rule was progressing linearly year over year over year. And I think there's still a case to be made that he has. But when you look at some deeper metrics, I have some SRS ratings to show you all on the left-hand side of the screen. There is a case analytically that outside of blowing out Akron and Houston Christian, that Nebraska really didn't improve all that much from last year. Last year, they were 31st in SRS. This year, they are 62nd. When you look at ESPN's efficiency metrics, now, they're not totally comparable because each season has its own average, has its own weight, but I think efficiency metrics do tell us a lot and are more accurate comparing them season over season than FPI ratings. Nebraska in efficiency is 56th this year with a 57.9 rating. Last year, they were 39th with a 66.8 rating. There's a lot of evidence to suggest, on the contrary, that this year, Nebraska's actually just kind of leveled from where they were last year. A huge part of that, of course, is Dylan Raiola and the quarterback injury. But what I will also say to that is you do not want to have one player have that much impact on your team. And Raiola was not the reason why Nebraska surrendered 37 to Penn State or 38 of the 40 points to the Iowa Hawkeyes. He's not the reason why. The offensive line was horrid. It was worse than it was last year. It was the worst of the Matt Rule era. Donovan Raiola, this is his 4th year with the Cornhuskers, and I'm not going to lie when I say that it's been disappointing. It's been quite disgusting. Allowing negative 202 sack yards and 30 sacks is unacceptable, especially when you have the schedule Nebraska does, which is a schedule that, because Penn State was down, was even easier than last year's schedule. And they got pushed around in almost all of their games on the lines of scrimmage. The 7 games they won were because of their outside skill position talent and their corners and secondary. It was in spite of their trench play. The team lacked physicality. They were small. They are small. And they were not tough. In the Penn State game, Penn State was able to run down their throat. Iowa was able to run down their throat. Iowa was able to pass an average for around 10 yards per attempt on them and totally control that game. They were lucky that they didn't play Indiana again this year. Indiana would have beaten them by 50 or 60 points. They would have committed the same war crimes against Nebraska that they did against Illinois. They were fortunate to play this version of Michigan and not past versions of Michigan. They were fortunate to get Michigan and USC on the schedule at home instead of play either on the road or have to face Indiana, Ohio State, or Oregon at home or in any environment, any setting. And that is bad. And even though Matt Rule has won 5 games first year, 6 games plus 1 in the bowl game equals 7 in year 2, he's won 7 this year with an opportunity to win 8. Nebraska wants to get back to consistently contending for the playoffs, and only having good skill position players, well, that was the one bright spot of this year. Emmett Johnson having 15 rushing touchdowns, Emmett Johnson having close to 1,500 rushing yards. He had, by the way, like 1,700, 1,800. It's actually 12 rushing touchdowns. My apologies. But he had 3 receiving touchdowns. So 15 total touchdowns. He had close to 1,500 rushing yards. And he had 1,821 total yards with only 1 fumble. Hopefully, for Nebraska's sake, he can come back. And Dane Key, Neziah Hunter were good. Dylan Raiola made great strides. But there's still a ton of work to be done. And I think that a great way to close this out and summarize my thoughts on Matt Rule and Nebraska are that I think they are on track to being back by their Big Ten standards. But if we're talking about whether or not they're on track to win titles or compete for them, like Big Ten titles, national titles, I don't see it at this point. I think that Matt Rule is going to do a great job bringing them back to being competent, and then a few years here or there, they'll have an opportunity to cycle up and reach the playoffs. But with how things are currently constructed, and with how they're really banking on the portal and this upcoming recruiting class to really break through, I think that's risky, and I have not seen eliteness in development, in coaching, in recruiting, in game decisions, in scouting. I've seen a lot of good. I've seen a lot of average. I've seen some bad in other areas. All of it averages to Nebraska's median is probably an above average to good football program. I do not think Rule is a guy to bring them to an elite level. But I also never really had those expectations either. If you're a Nebraska fan who thinks that they can win it all, or that they should pursue that, I think there's a little bit more that you need to see, and that's putting it kindly, before we go all in here. But on the overall program outlook, I'm still optimistic that they're heading in the right direction. For Iowa, the team that won this game, that won the Heroes game, the Hawkeyes, I don't know exactly what it is about them, but it's different. And I've come to realize that the way they do things is underappreciated, to say the least. What Iowa has been able to do year over year, where they are clean, they are they cut through, they are crisp, they know what they want, and they get what they want. Iowa's just a different program amongst the ex-Big Ten West schools and amongst a lot of not just the Big Ten, but the Power Four at large. Iowa did something that only the schools at the top can really say that they do on a consistent basis. Reload. Iowa did this in 2025. You might be laughing at me, but think about it this way. They returned only 57% of their 2024 production this year. And in ESPN's game control metrics, Iowa this year is 18th. Last year, Iowa was 29th. In FPI, Iowa last year was 22nd with an 11.5 rating. They have a 14.6 rating, and they are 20th this year. In efficiency this year, Iowa is 17th with a 78.5 rating. Last year, they were 27th with a 69.9 rating. Iowa returned a little over half of its roster, and they didn't just reload. They got better. That is something that I think very few teams this year, even at the top, can say. We'll have to wait until the end of the year to know whether or not Oregon and or Ohio State got better despite all they lost last year. It'll be the same thing with Georgia. It will be the same thing with Alabama, though Alabama returned more production than Iowa did. The only other school in the Big Ten that I can confidently say lost close to half of their production and got better besides Iowa are twofold. Actually, threefold now that I think about it. Washington lost a ton, got better, but they're in year two compared to year one. You sort of expect that, especially with the quarterback situation. USC and Indiana, that was not quite as expected. Not quite, especially with Indiana. Iowa is in rarefied air, and that speaks to their program. It speaks to where they focus their resources into. A lot of that has to do with line of scrimmage play. Their offensive and defensive lines excelled this year. Iowa was among one of the top schools in America in yards per carry and in rushing success rate. For much of the year, they were hovering around 5. Right now, they're only averaging 4.9 yards per carry, which is 64th. Might not sound amazing, but a lot of that's because they're not very explosive there. But what they are good at is consistently getting those 3, 4, 5 yard carries. They have a 46.3% rushing success rate, which is 12th, and their havoc rate allowed, which havoc plays are TFLs, sacks, interceptions. A lot of it has to do with line of scrimmage play. Iowa is second in the Big Ten, only behind Oregon in havoc rate allowed. They're ahead of Ohio State. They're ahead of Michigan. The only Power 4 schools they're behind are Oregon and Alabama, who have some of the most talented offensive lines in America. Defensively, Iowa only allows a grand... Let me find it here. It's going to take me a minute. Sorry, live research, people, but they are top 25 in yards allowed per carry, only allowing 4.32. Whether it is Trevor Locke, whether it's Jennings Dunker, whether it is Logan Jones, their center, Leighton Jones, other players on the offensive line, and then you have, Jonah Pace, you have Aaron Graves on the D-line, on that interior, Max Llewellyn, Ethan Herkett. Their line of scrimmage play it's top-notch. The offense, it improved from last year to this year, and I can say that because their strength of schedule is tougher, and yet they're averaging a little bit more than one additional point per game. Last year, their losses came to, UCLA on the road, Michigan State on the road, Iowa State on the road, and Ohio State on the road. This year, they came to Oregon at home, Indiana at home, Iowa State on the road. Last year's Iowa State loss was at home. And they also lost to USC on the road. They had a tougher four-game conglomerate of teams this year than they did last year. And that is where who you are is really tested. And in those games this year, I thought Iowa did a better job offensively than they did last year, despite not having Caleb Johnson. The defense was superior too, allowing about 0.05 fewer points per play, and those add up over time. Iowa's defense for much of this year has been in that top 10 area after having a pretty shaky start. The months of October and November have been fantastic for Phil Parker and his unit. And where I want to close this off with is after that Nebraska game where they kicked Nebraska's butt. They grabbed Nebraska's spine and just tore it out of their body. It was the largest win over Nebraska since 2017 in the final year of Mike Riley. Can Iowa, with the offensive upgrades, with the defense reloading, with the fact that time and time again they've showed that they can reload, if they continue to improve on offense and use the portal and are active there, and Kirk Ferentz has actually been pretty active in the portal with quarterbacks, he's used it with some defensive linemen to some success, and I imagine they might be more active this year. We'll see. He's even used it with offensive line depth. Can Iowa take that next step as a program and potentially go from consistently winning 8 games and sometimes 9 or 10 to more consistently winning 9 or 10 games and being a playoff threat every other year? Or every year they get a fairly doable schedule? Or even when they have a schedule like this year, which is super tough, and they're still only, a combined 2 touchdowns away from being 11-1 or 10-0 and being in the playoffs. Let me know what you think, because I would love your thoughts there. I'm at a point where I think, depending on what moves they make yearly in the portal and at quarterback, and if they can develop at quarterback, they have a nice 4-star coming in this 2026 recruiting class where they nearly had as many blue chip players as 3 stars. I believe that Iowa could level up as a program and continue to evolve and adapt and potentially reach new heights that they have not seen in a while, which would be wild given many thought that leaving the Big Ten West would hurt Iowa. But what if it pushes Iowa to achieve bigger and better things and helps it level up as a program? Another topic of discussion that I think is important is Michigan. We'll talk about the game here. There is concern for Michigan after that loss to Ohio State. I don't care what the Sunshine Pumpers think. I don't care what other Michigan fans think. And yes, I am a Michigan fan, but I'm an objective analyst first, and I will always be that way. Even through that lens, there are issues and there are concerns for Michigan. There are a lot of people who are objective who will tell you that what happened with Michigan this year was just A-okay. It's really not. Now, was it as bad as the early collapse that Penn State suffered? No. But that was a absolute disaster that resulted in a deserving firing of James Franklin that then their athletic department bungled and completely messed up. Michigan needs changes, and while I think in some ways they improved this year, they did not improve enough given the talent on their roster and how much easier their schedule is. Case in point, Michigan last season had a strength of schedule that was 5th nationally. It was the toughest schedule in the Big Ten until Ohio State played 4 top 10 teams in a row. It was the toughest. This year, they have the whopping 26th toughest strength of schedule. Not a cakewalk. Oklahoma played a part in that for sure in the non-con, but still much easier. No team they played this year, outside of maybe Ohio State, was as good as Texas last year, and no team on the schedule, period, was as good as Ohio State last year, which we can all admit We knew it last year, but those who were stubborn didn't know it until Ohio State dominated Michigan this year. That was a flukish win. Look at the game control. For this year with Michigan, it was 16th. Last year for Michigan, it was 23rd. In FPI, Michigan last year was 29th with a 10.4 power rating. This year, they have a 15 power rating at 19th. In efficiency this year, they're 20th with a 75.6 rating. That's on a 0 to 100 scale, by the way. Last year, they had a 68.1 rating at 32nd. So they are better this year across the board. But it wasn't by enough to have any type of breakthrough. And in the big games, Michigan really turtled up and showed that their development is poor. Running back, linebacker, and O-line, I think, are the only places that had major strides and were much better this year than last year. And outside of running back and maybe linebacker, I don't think we've seen a really high ceiling performance out of any other position group. Michigan screams like a team that is carried by talent. The fact that they are top 15 in roster talent and bordering on the top 10 with how they've been recruiting makes me feel like this staff, if not for the talent advantage, if not for the NIL advantage, if not for the brand advantage, would have Michigan in a much worse place than it is. Michigan was 0-3 against teams with a top 15 talent roster. The only ones they played on their schedule: USC, Oklahoma, and, well, of course, Ohio State. Like, Ohio State's third or second. And when you factor in, like, actual on-field production, they're probably the most talented roster in America right now. In those games, Michigan lost by, at the bare minimum, 2 scores. And in some cases, like against USC and Ohio State, they lost by 3 scores. 18 points in both games. And what we saw in those games was Michigan was not able to parlay their talent into success, into getting up on opponents early and then sitting on them like they usually do. And they couldn't do that because they didn't have a distinct talent edge. And in 2 of those games, they were on the road. In the Ohio State game, Ohio State's just in a completely different galaxy. So it didn't matter home versus road. And I don't think it would have mattered against USC either. Oklahoma might be a different story with their style of play. But you got to win the games where they're played at and show competency in the big ones. And Moore and his staff have not done that. The rushing attack, don't get me wrong, was great. Michigan was top 15 in yards per carry. They did that without much wide receiver production, and they did that while their rushing attack in their big games had some bright moments, but overall had very poor days, in part because of their one-dimensionality. That's all Michigan was good at this year, was running the ball. And they weren't elite there, but good, great, and possibly elite next year? Maybe. That's really the one bright spot, though. Some changes that I think might need to be made, and I'll talk about this some more in another segment, in another live show. I think Wink Martindale has to go. He's the old dog that does the same thing, the same tricks. He can't learn the new ones, and he does the same routine. All he knows how to do is sit and, pat with his big wide eyes when you tell him good boy and give him a bone. That's all he knows how to do. It's the same trick over and over and over again. And it has been destroyed now this year by 2 brilliant offenses. It's been absolutely killed by Ohio State and especially by USC. And Oklahoma was able to dice it up. And those opening drives where teams just always kill Michigan's defense in the scripted drives, that shows a lack of coaching and preparation. So Wink Martindale has to go, and I think that's very clear. Is Sharon Moore the guy? Is a perfect place to close this out with. Because I am going to say no for right now. There is a chance I'm wrong, but I know a lot of people want this to work. What I'm going to ask you, though, is do you really think through 2 seasons with some tremendous NFL talent that is either underdeveloped or underutilized, Do you really think that Jim Harbaugh would lose to this Ohio State team by 18 with this roster? Would he lose to USC by 18 with this roster? Would he lose to Oklahoma on the road by 11 with this roster? Last year, does he get depantsed by Oregon and Texas, and even by Illinois and Washington? We got to be honest there, the way that Moore did. Does he bungle? Does he mess up? Does he choke away the Indiana game like Moore did with the roster he had? Does that roster look that bad under his guidance and his staff's guidance? And I just think the answer is no. And that's what Michigan should expect. Michigan should expect to have a coach closer to the caliber of Harbaugh than the caliber of Sherrone Moore. So there are deep concerns, and it is my firm belief that if Sherrone Moore does not reach the college football playoff next year as Michigan's head coach, he will be bye-bye. He will be gone. And professionally speaking, his time at Michigan will be dead, and he will be on to hopefully a different job with bigger and brighter things ahead. But I do not think this will work, and I want to put that on record. For Ohio State, meanwhile, I think there is a lot at work for them. And I think that their game really showed that, hey, they mean business. And they are the best program in America right now. I don't really know who can deny that, by the way, that they're the number one program in America. Ohio State, since the start of 2024, has won a grand total of 26 games with 2 losses. They're the number one program in America. And I don't want to forget that they have a national championship in there and 4 wins in the college football playoff. They are one of the most physical teams in America. They are as tough as nails. They develop at an elite level. They have finesse and a swagger to them that is also usually correlated with the best programs, and some would argue is a causation for being a top program, or causes a program to be at the top. And their prestige, their history, which has said and says they're the number one program in America, well, that's being lived out right now, because this is one of the best runs in college football history, much like the Georgia one from the end of 2021 until the SEC championship game in 2023. It is fantastic in the same way as Clemson's run was in the late 2010s, where you have these long win streaks and they're impressive, and within those you dominate teams at the top and cement that you are at the top. And that's what Ohio State did in their win over Michigan. They showed that they're the number one program in football, and that you have to be at a certain level to even play with them, not just to stop them, but to hang with them, to dance with them. You have to be at a certain prestige and level and have a certain type of coach and roster and staff to do that. I already talked about it. 1 national title, 7-1 versus the top 10 in FPI. They are undefeated against anyone not within the top 10 in FPI since 2024, outside of Michigan at home last year, which was, a very weird loss. Chalk that up as one of the weirdest losses of the 21st century, with a 26-2 overall record in that time frame. I think that with the Buckeyes, some people don't understand this defense and how it can perform this well after what it lost. Now, in some regards, you could argue that it doesn't make sense, but in another regard, you could argue that it does make sense. They have the athletes, they have the position coaches, they have the coordinator. Their previous coordinator left them in a good place, and they returned their green dot guy, Caleb Downs, and Sonny Styles. And they also rotated enough last year to where you got to see some live game reps of who the future was going to be, and you knew that at bare minimum, it was going to be good or great, like a top 15, top 10 defense, certainly top 10 in terms of personnel. And all these things have went right, and right now it's the best defense in America. What Patricia has done is absolutely phenomenal, and defense wins championships. So that is another reason why they're 12-0 right now and why they're peaking. Ohio State under Day is having, relative to the rest of the sport, their best era under Day, their best time frame under Day. I say relative to the rest of the sport because I think 2019 was and will always be Ryan Day's best team from a power ratings angle. But that was a different era in football where recruiting was more structured and more hierarchical. You couldn't, pay players, at least directly. So other things like blue blood status and history came into play. And yeah, I think everyone understands that. But relative to the state of the sport, Ryan Day and Ohio State are in the best position they've ever been in as a couple, as a pair, together. They are a quarterback factory where they lose Will Howard, and Sayan is a record setter and breaks the regular season record for completion percentage. They lose C.J. Stroud, and no, Kyle McCord was not amazing, but Kyle McCord also wasn't terrible. See what he did at Syracuse. And that is their bare minimum, is Kyle McCord, a quarterback that many schools would love to have. They're a receiver factory, with Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate being wide receiver 1 and 2 in college football right now, and wide receiver 1 and 2 in the next 2 NFL drafts. It's incredible what they have been able to do with that position. And Brian Hartline is now the head coach at USF. He'll stay with the team through the playoffs. His stamp has been made on history. He is the greatest position coach of all time, and the run that he has had is incredible with receivers. I know there's going to be someone in the comment section probably saying that, well, he did it with a bunch of 5 stars. The hit rate that he had with prospects, even with 5 stars, was unusual and was special. And to have them all go in the first round it's bananas. It's great to be on top. And will this happen forever? I don't know. But is it the case now? Yes. And I think the great thing, if you are a Buckeye fan, if you are a player, if you are a coach there, no matter who you are, is that as long as Ryan Day is the head coach of the Ohio State Buckeyes, they will always be close to the top, if not at the top. And every single year, they will be competing for national championships, for Big Ten championships, and 99% of the time, if not 100% of the time, they will always be in the college football playoff. And that's special, and that's something that most other programs, if not no other program, can say. That's my assessment of those teams, really from Rivalry weekend. Let me know your thoughts in the live chat. Thanks to Armand Hammer for being a moderator. Thank you to Esoteric DJ Honor Society Reloaded for being a consistent live stream commenter. Thank you to John Manduk for checking in and saying that Iowa's not a contending team. They are a decent team. Nobody's scared of Iowa. Trust me, what a joke comment. Iowa played Oregon close, almost beat them. They played Indiana close, almost beat them. I think that Ohio State would have probably matched up better with them than some other teams, but I don't know that for sure. The last time Ohio State played in Kinnick, they lost by like 30. So they are a serious team. Now, are they a national title contender? Heck no. But I think they can level up as a program. And I just wanted to say that before we move on to conference championship week. I want to talk about why I think Texas Tech will crush BYU again. Because I'm pretty set on the idea that the Red Raiders, look, Texas Tech left meat on the bone from their last matchup against BYU, where they won 29-7 and absolutely dominated. So I'm convinced that they are going to dominate round 2. They are going to win the Big 12 emphatically and earn that first round bye. Texas Tech is a 13.5-point favorite against BYU. And I think that because of their overall roster advantage, they are going to win emphatically. They have the far superior roster. They have more NFL players. They are more talented from a blue chip ratio angle. They have superior power ratings. They have superior game performance metrics. In the Big 12, Texas Tech, in terms of efficiency, is third. BYU is eighth. Texas Tech is fifth in FPI. BYU is 15th. Texas Tech is third in game control. BYU is 14th. Tech is second in average in-game win probability. BYU is 24th. I do think, and I will concede, that Kalani Sitake is a better coach than Joey McGuire, but that is possibly the only edge that BYU has in this game, and I don't think that the staff edge is overall big enough, or that BYU is an alien player to where those factors can overcome what Texas Tech is roster-wise. They also have the number one defensive line. So Tech has 37 sacks and 88 tackles for loss. They are sixth in those categories. They have the number one defense per ESPN's efficiency metrics. It is number one by a mile in the Big 12, and among all conferences and all FBS teams, it's actually a decent bit ahead of Ohio State's in those metrics on the play-per-play ESPN efficiency metrics. In adjusted EPA per play allowed, Texas Tech has the second best Power 4 defense. It is third nationally with a negative 0.23 EPA per play allowed. They have one of the highest havoc rates. They have one of the best run defenses, one of the best pass defenses. Shieldwood's done an incredible job, but Lee Hunter, David Bailey, Romello Height, those three, and especially Height and Bailey, are a big reason why they are so dominant and explosive defensively, and why they should be able to take advantage of Bear Bachmeier, LJ Martin, and that BYU offensive line. The backfield for Tech, not offensively, like I think Cameron Dickey's pretty good, same with Jacoby Williams, and the offensive line in front of them with Howard Sampson, Jacob Ponton is impressive. But I'm talking about the defensive backfield. So you have Jacob Rodriguez there, who is an All-American linebacker, an elite college player. It's insane what he is doing, and they're trying to get him to the Heisman ceremony, and I get it, because he isn't that impactful as a linebacker. But also Ben Roberts, John Curry, Brennan Jordan, the corners, Dante Balfour, and especially Bryce Pollock, transfer from Mississippi State, who is an SEC-level corner and is dominating in the Big 12. They can clamp up BYU's offense, just like they did in round one, where Texas Tech shut out BYU for 3 quarters. On top of the defense and the roster dominance, what you have to understand with Texas Tech is they break off explosive runs in every game. And they have this capacity to put together explosive plays, to run the ball. They have tough running backs who can break through tackles and a great offensive line in front of it. It's not the greatest offensive line. It's probably just a good unit overall, but with the defense they have and the backs they have and the overall system they have on offense, it's good enough. They're averaging 4.96 yards per carry on the ground, the Red Raiders are. This is against a defense from BYU that allows 4.88 yards per carry. So unless BYU puts together a spectacular performance, Texas Tech should average 4.5 to 5 yards per carry. And maybe factoring in the explosive runs, they hit to 5.5 or even 6. That with Tech's defense is not enough for a team like BYU to beat them. And again, they left meat on the bone. 29-7 with all the turnovers they had and with how many field goals Texas Tech settled for. This could have been so much worse. It could have been infinitely worse than it was. There's probably a better chance, and I don't want to disrespect BYU too much because I think BYU's future with the investment that Kalani Sitake's been provided with how BYU wants to keep him, and with the coaching job he's done overall at BYU, I think that combined with new investment, new life, will lead to BYU becoming a better football program in the next 5 years than they were in the past 5, which is crazy because in the past 5 years they've won a lot of games. But I think there's more of a shot this Saturday that Texas Tech wins by more than 22 than BYU straight up pulls off the upset. Tech is the better team. Tech can win a national title. BYU should be in the playoff. They should be a lock to be in the playoff, but they really aren't capable of advancing past the quarterfinals. These are two teams on totally different playing fields. The crowd in Arlington will be in favor of Texas Tech, and I am just pretty convinced that Texas Tech is going to win this one, and they're going to win it big. They're going to win it big. Excuse me there. Okay, now talking about the SEC championship game, we'll get to the Big Ten championship game. Then we have some conversations about recruiting. Make sure, everyone, if you have not already, to like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and be active in the live chat. Thank you. Now let's get on with it and talk about why I think that Georgia has a path to beat Alabama. But all of you know, if at least you've watched the channel and saw my SEC preview video, that I'm actually picking Alabama to win here. But I want to take the Georgia angle. Georgia is a 2.5 point not underdog, 2.5 point favorite to Alabama this Saturday in the SEC championship game. Georgia's path to beating Alabama relies on two things. Number one, Georgia's secondary needs to have the game of their life. And they need to play at a level that they did against Texas this season in November, or perhaps even better. And number two, they need to stick to what worked in the first game, where they were able to run the football and move it in between the 20s. In this game, though, they just need to step up and make that one play that they missed in round one. That's Georgia's path here to beat Alabama. There's a reason why Georgia is only a 2.5 point favorite against the Crimson Tide. The dominant ground game is what worked for them in round one, where they ran for close to 200 yards, around for 200, I believe, maybe even more than that. They averaged around 6 yards per carry. This is a classic 3 yards in a cloud of dust rushing offense. They're not the prettiest from a yards per carry angle, even from a success rate angle. But when you look at the overall rushing offense that Georgia has with Nate Frazier and with Josh McCray, the Bulldogs this season, they are averaging 4.78 yards per carry with a 42% rushing success rate and a 0.04 EPA per rush. It has waned. It did a little bit against Georgia Tech. It was not incredible against Texas, but they have shown at times this year they can have a very dominant power rushing attack where they don't ever get explosives pretty much, but they can consistently pick up 3-4 yards when needed. And their offensive line is improved, especially in the run blocking department from where it was last year. They have a suffocating run defense. They only have 3.64 yards per carry, which is fifth. And where that matters is while Alabama doesn't run the football a lot, and Alabama matches up well with Georgia through the air, they are going to run the ball. It's not like they're never going to run the football. And by having a suffocating run defense, you can make sure that Alabama consistently stays behind the chains. And if your secondary plays well, and or if Simpson plays poorly, you can cash in keeping Alabama off schedule into turnovers, into punts, into 3-and-outs, into busted drives, and then just turn over their offense to your offense, turn over the ball to your offense, and have them cash in for scores. Georgia also has reliable weapons, and as the season's gone on, I know Stockton's had some ups and downs, but he's a capable quarterback who's made some good throws. And with Zachariah Branch and with Oscar Delp and Lawson Lucky and Dylan Bell, they have enough weapons, and Nate Frazier's a weapon too, same with Stockton's legs, to where they can generate a higher floor on offense than they could last year, where we all saw the Ole Miss game, and we saw that game against Georgia Tech in that first half where, man, oh man, that offense could be an absolute mess. This year, the floor is not that low. So I think there is a higher number than a lot of people probably think in their mind when they think of Georgia's offense. There's a higher number of points that will be scored at a bare minimum by Georgia than a lot of people think. So if their defense can come to play in the same way that their offense has, I like their chances here, and the reliable weapons are a big part of that. They're also less QB needy, less QB reliant than Alabama is. Bama needs Simpson to play well in order to win games against competent opponents. Georgia doesn't exactly need that, and that has especially been the case as the season's gone on, and it feels like the defense has improved and the offense has maybe regressed a little bit. And I think that's favorable here, given the coaching pedigree of Kirby Smart, the fact that you rarely beat and outcoach his defenses, and Georgia is talented, and they're talented enough offensively to where they don't need an elite quarterback to move the football and to score points. The Bulldogs are a team that is hard to beat. They're one of the best teams in America. They can win it all this year. And the other point, too, that I want to make, it's not an exact science. It's why I saved it for last, but Kirby Smart's hard to beat. And he's hard to beat twice in a row. What about 3 times in a row? What are the odds that Kalen DeBoer beats Kirby Smart 3 times in a row? It helps that he's had matchup edges in each of these 3 games, including this one, but it would not shock me at all if Kirby Smart was able to pull this game off and win this game, especially given, look, Texas was favored over him twice last year, and he beat him. And keep in mind, they almost beat Alabama this year. They were so close. And Georgia, as the season's gone on, has improved on defense, and I would say since that game, Alabama has probably regressed on the offensive side of the football. Speaking of the Crimson Tide, Alabama matches up well with Georgia, and I'm going to tell you why. As a 2.5-point underdog against the Georgia Bulldogs, Alabama should not just play competitively, but they should win. I think this is a wrong team favored type of situation here. Alabama's receivers, Jeremy Bernard, Isaiah Horton, Ryan Williams, facing off against a Georgia defensive back group that has talent, but with KJ Bolden, Ellis Robinson IV, Ja'Cory Thomas, Dalen Everett, and Jonel Aguero, is not as talented as previous Georgia defensive back groups. It's not as deep. The Tide have a pretty sizable edge here, I would think. You factor that into with the quarterback play, where I do think Simpson has the edge over Gunnar Stockton, and then you also factor in, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, Alabama's elite secondary against Georgia receivers that aren't as good as Alabama's, and Alabama clearly has the air attack edge here. Alabama's Air Force is much better than Georgia's Air Force. Georgia's ground forces, they're armed. Oh, well, not armed forces, but yeah, the ground forces, they might have the edge there, but maybe not as much as you think, and we'll talk about that. But again, these Crimson Tide wide receivers, their offense averages 7.36 yards per attempt. Georgia surrenders about 6.1 yards per attempt. And the talent of Alabama's receivers is also greater than the talent of these Georgia DBs. So when they play, think about what happened the first time around, where initially Ty Simpson was able to carve up this Georgia defense. Initially. Again, not saying it's going to happen now, for sure. I'm not saying that Georgia's defense is awful and Alabama's offense is amazing, but Ty Simpson in the first game around was 24 of 38, 273 yards and 7.3 yards per attempt with 2 touchdowns. Alabama in that game, you know what they did? They were 13 of 19 on third down. That is a systemic, surgical destruction of an opponent. And the receiver versus DB matchup gives Alabama the opportunity to do that again. They have the slight roster edge, too. I know in the updated team talent composite rankings, for the first time ever, Georgia overtook Alabama for that one spot before this year. But when you factor in who has more players on their roster that will be drafted this year and then play on Sundays, and you factor in seniority and 2-deep depth along with that, Alabama's older. Alabama has more NFL-ready players in their 2-deep right now. Down the road, I would say, yes, Georgia probably has the better roster. And if you factor in all players equally, yeah, Georgia's probably more talented. But in the players that matter, who make the plays that matter, because true freshmen usually for these teams aren't playing a ton. Maybe at some positions, but not the majority of positions. Alabama has the better roster here. And that helps, along with the scheme and roster edges that we've talked about, in the elite secondary. The elite secondary is going to prevent big plays from Georgia. It's going to force them to be methodical, and it's going to force them to go on these long drives that could result in touchdowns, but also could result in punts, could result on missed fourth down opportunities, and could result in a field goal kicking contest. And while Georgia might beat Alabama in a field goal kicking contest, I imagine that Alabama is probably better able to create big plays here for touchdowns than Georgia. Keon Sabb, Bray Hubbard, Dijon Lee, and Deshaun Jones, and of course, Zabian Brown. Almost forgot Zabian Brown. How could I do that? Zabian Brown's an elite corner. This is, I would say, the best secondary in America. Don't know if I've come off of that. I know statistics won't tell you that, but they also are playing, at least relative to other schedules, much better quarterbacks in passing offenses or even just pass-heavy offenses than many other secondaries are in college football. Say the ones in the Big Ten that analytics would tell you are better than Alabama's. Their defensive line and linebackers are athletic. They have good enough players up front like Tim Keenan, for example, Quarissa, Deontay Lawson, to where that should help slow down Georgia's run enough to, again, make it a tight game that heavily involves game control. And Kalen DeBoer teams are some of the best teams dating back to his time at Washington, where if it is a limited possession game with game control, they are absolute kings in coming out on top. And lastly, we got DeBoer versus Smart here. So DeBoer's outcoached Smart in their last two games. With these advantages, who's to say he can't for a third time? Who's to say? Who's to say? Ohio State against Indiana is another game that is intriguing for a variety of reasons, to say the least. What's intriguing about it, take a sip of water here. What's intriguing about it, for example, is the fact that despite both of these teams being relatively even in power ratings, Ohio State's a 4.5-point favorite, and they open up as a 6.5-point favorite. And a lot of people are picking Ohio State, which they can win. In fact, I actually agree with the fact they should be favored. But the amount of people picking them, in some cases by dominant margins, is, well, interesting to say the least. But I'm going to take the Ohio State angle here. We'll talk about the Indiana angle after this. Ohio State's path to beating Indiana is simple. Maximize in every possible way your talent edge that you have over the Indiana Hoosiers. You have more alien players. Indiana does not have a Jeremiah Smith, a Carnell Tate, a Caleb Downs, or an Arvell Reese. They do not have those players. I especially highlighted them because there are other players on Ohio State's roster that IU just does not have from a talent and measurables angle, but they could have in the future. I don't know if Indiana will ever see, even with Curt Cignetti, and let's say he recruits at a very high level, I don't know if they'll ever have the type of player that Smith, Tate, Reese, or Downs are from an NFL perspective, from just a freak alien perspective. The odds aren't zero because Cignetti is a genius and Cignetti is wonderful at his job and they are recruiting better. But Ohio State in this game just has a massive edge when it comes to alien players. They have a suffocating defensive front that does feature Reese, can feature Caleb Downs, because he can play in that 3-high safety look where he can come down in the box. They also have Sonny Styles, who could be a first-round linebacker, certainly will be a day 2 guy. Caden McDonald at D tackles projected to be a first-rounder. They have a couple of guys who are good from a college angle in Edric Houston, Will Smith, and Tywone Malone. And Caden Curry and Kenyatta Jackson Jr. are future NFL players too. They only allow 3.86 yards per carry. They are one of the best in America at getting pressures with only 4. A lot of that does have to do with their coverage. You see that in how their havoc rate isn't exactly stellar. Havoc rate is sacks, TFLs, interceptions, passes defended. They're more of a defense that just, attacks aggressively and makes sure that they're never off schedule and always make sure they're disciplined. They're suffocating. They're not one punch and they knock you out, but if they miss, then they're dead. They're just this consistent boa constrictor on defense, and that's often what the best defenses are, and it's part of the reason why Ohio State's defense is the best in America, and why I think their run defense is better than their pass defense, to be frank. The quarterback release that almost said Jeremiah Smith, but that Julian Sayin has is another reason why they should beat Indiana. It's a part of their path. Because Indiana's linebackers are very smart, their safeties are too, and they're aggressive. If a quarterback had a slow release, and we've seen this against this team before, where if they have a slow release or they're not processing quickly, you can see a turnover here, a turnover there. If you question yourself too much, you'll get sacked by this team. They are excellent in every way, this defense is. So what do you need? You need quick decision-making. You need quick release. And while the aliens that you have and the physicality that you have can help move them, what can really help open them up is a quick release and knowing where you need to put the football and putting it there. And Sayin can do that. Circling back to Ohio State's defense, this is one I'm a little bit shakier on. But if you are Ohio State, you should be able to slow down Indiana's receivers with your corners and with your coverage. I'm shakier on it because Indiana's receivers have a knack for getting open. They're better than they are last year. Mendoza's a great passer, and cornerback is Ohio State's weakness. And by weakness, I don't mean it's bad. It's a great corner room. It's one of the better corner rooms in football. They just don't have any unanimous first-rounders or aliens there. They just have a bunch of good to great players. That's different from having, Arvell Reese and Sonny Styles as your two starting linebackers, which is just absolutely insane. But if you're Ohio State, you should trust that defensive back core of yours to cover these guys and lock them down, especially with the talent edge and in some cases even, matching their length and height. Like Igbinosun's a big corner. He probably has a size edge on those Indiana receivers for the most part. And last but not least is pass protection. Ohio State should be able to, from a just a talent angle. Again, Ohio State's path to beating Indiana and cementing that is, I think, through their talent here, because that is the definitive edge they have. They should be able to, with Saraveld, and if Daniels is consistent or if he's able to be supported by a tight end, be able to protect Sayin enough to get the ball out and to have enough scoring drives, or maybe just enough long drives to be able to come out with a win against the best team they faced all year and win Ohio State their first Big Ten championship since 2019. We are picking Indiana, though, so I do want to talk about why, what Indiana's path is and how they can win, because something that I hate how the Big Ten championship game is talked about as if Indiana has a sliver of a chance. I hate that the conversation surrounding the 2025 Big Ten championship game is that Indiana needs a break to win, that Indiana almost doesn't have much of a chance, or that it's viewed as a bold prediction to pick Indiana to win. It's not. They're only 4.5-point underdogs against Ohio State, and when you look at the power ratings and metrics, this should be Ohio State -1 or a pick'em. The line is a little bit too much in Ohio State's favor, and the Hoosiers have more than a chance to beat Ohio State. They have a really good chance. They have multiple pathways to beat Ohio State in the same way that Ohio State has multiple paths to beat them. The path for Indiana to win here is through their lines of scrimmage. Indiana's offensive line is deeper than it was last year. It's better. Pat Coogan is probably an upgrade over Mike Caddick at center, and Caddick was ridiculous. Carter Smith is better than he was last year. Khalil Benson is a great offensive tackle. Bray Lynch and Drew Evans this time around are both healthy for this game, and they're a little bit deeper too. On top of that, when you look at the defense, Tyreek Tucker has been fantastic. Landino's made a good transition to defensive tackle. And their ends, Michael Kamara and Stephen Daly, they've improved from where their defensive ends were last year, where it was really the Michael Kamara show and no one else. Now they have depth there. They have 2 guys, maybe 3. At linebacker, they returned Aiden Fisher. Elijah Hardy stepped up wonderfully. And Isaiah Jones has performed at a high level. And their tight ends are better than they were last year. So their lines of scrimmage is one of the best in football. I want to see this game before declaring it straight up as the best, especially with how it looked when banged up on the offensive line. But I have an inkling that this could be the best lines of scrimmage in football. And how you beat Ohio State is through elite physicality and elite ground forces, because it's not because Ohio State's weak there. That's sometimes a misconception people have. They've been weak there before, but they have not been weak there for a while. It's because with Hartline, and this might change in the future, but Hartline's still there. The receivers are still going to be there for more than just this year. And with that combined with their defensive back groups, whether it's Tim Walton, Matt Guerreri, whether it's DC Jim Knowles or Matt Patricia, you have never been able to beat them through the air straight up. You've had to, match them through the air at times, but then try to surpass them on the ground. That's why Georgia was able to come back against them in 2022. That's why Michigan was able to beat them in 23. That is why Michigan was able to, in a stupid way, beat them last year, and why Oregon was able to beat them last year. If Indiana's going to get this done, it will be through the lines of scrimmage. Indiana's offense is multiple. 2, they can counteract Patricia's multiple defense. If Patricia wants to operate in a 4-2-5, they can power run, and they can take advantage of that. And they can play off of that with RPO to keep the safeties and linebackers honest a bit. If Patricia wants to go 4-3 and put the corners on more of an island there, if he wants to, run a 5-2-4, something along those lines, well, then Ohio State's corners are on islands, and Indiana probably likes their wide receivers against Ohio State's corners to a limited degree. You see what I'm saying? If they want to go 3-4 and have multiple linebackers out there and only 3 defensive linemen, and say they only send 3 out of that, or they, send the house or whatever, well, they have receivers that can get open. They have a tight end that can leak out of there, and they block well enough to where they probably can run on these guys a little bit. So it's not to say that they're going to destroy this defense. It's not what I think, in the same way that I don't think Ohio State is going to destroy Indiana's defense. These teams are pretty equal in a lot of ways. And if Ohio State's talent advantage is not what it is per the recruiting rankings, where it's nullified by other factors like playing the game, what the film has said, what happens on this given Saturday, then Indiana should be able to give that defense some adversity that they have not faced. The ground attack for Indiana, let's focus on that a little bit more. 6.02 yards per carry, which is 12th, and a 48.7 rushing success rate, which is 5th. They are deep at running back with Kobe Martin, with Kaelon Black, and Roman Hemby. Fernando Mendoza can run the football, and their offensive line for this game will be the healthiest it's been since probably, I would say, like the Michigan State game or the Oregon game. It's going to be the healthiest it's been in quite some time. So I like this ground attack. I think it's one of the best ground attacks in college football. And if they win this game, this will be a reason why. The receivers, too. The possession receivers. Talk about Elijah Surratt, Nomar Cooper Jr. They just get open. They make these amazing catches. Remember the Oregon game? Remember the Penn State game where Cooper just made some fantastic possession catches? Ohio State, I know, has more NFL talent at receiver. But from a collegiate catching angle, when IU's receivers are on, they can be as good as anyone else when it comes to making contested catches and also getting open. And think about that paired with Mendoza and how good he's been this year, and paired with this rushing attack. And paired with their RPO scheme, and even paired with when they don't run RPO, and they just, whether it's straight up they run at you or they, go drop back pass on you, they're so diverse, but they're not the master of none. They're kind of the master of everything, in a sense, that they should be able to put up some yards here and some points and some touchdowns. And that's the path here. A lot of it is through the offense because of how good Patricia's defense is and how that's where Ohio State wants to lean on. The reason Ohio State's able to go so low possession and game control is because of their defense. If you're able to somehow attack that, they're going to have to completely change the game plan because that's where the game plan is through. And that gets to the talented backfield, where Indiana is averaging more than an interception per game. They are one of the best in America at forcing turnovers. A lot of that stuff can sometimes be viewed as fluky. Sometimes, like Notre Dame last year, Michigan in some seasons. But in terms of fluky, all that means is it might puff up the power ratings a bit. Having that big of a turnover margin is indicative of having sound fundamental football. And what Indiana has been able to do is get pressure, make you make throws you regret. They are able to make contested catches with their defensive backs, and they tackle at a high level, and they get pressure at a high level. Like sometimes they will show pressure from one angle, and they bring it from the entire different side of the field. Bryant Haynes does a good job mixing up his looks, operating out of different modes of attack, and I think that Indiana's defense, in the same way their offense is a better shot against this Buckeye defense than a lot of people give them credit for, it's the same thing with this Hoosier defense. I'm picking Indiana to win. I'm not guaranteeing an Indiana win, but I don't like how this conversation is about how Ohio State's going to win here. They could. They could. They should be favored to win. They should be. They should probably be favored by 1, though. I think 4.5 might be a bit too excessive. And Indiana, as we've discussed, has more than a chance. They have multiple avenues of attack. They have an elite coaching staff. They, relative to a college standpoint, have an elite roster, starting roster at least. And they're deeper at certain positions than they were last year. I will also say, too, I don't know how this is bold, but I don't think it is. Ohio State's not what they were last year. They're not better. Last year in the regular season, they played 3 top 10 FPI teams, and they crushed Indiana, they controlled Penn State, and they barely lost to Oregon. This year, they haven't played a top 10 FPI team yet. So, I don't, if you firmly believe that Ohio State's better this year than they were last year, I don't think you're taking strength of schedule into account. I think that in order to fully determine that, we have to wait until what they do in the playoff. But as of right now, I don't think there's a lot of evidence to back that up. I think it's inconclusive as of right now. So that's my opinion on this game for sure. Now we can get to some more of the fun stuff, because this was all about, certain matchups, for example. But I want to get to some recruiting. I want to get to some even 2026 talk. Already some preseason talk on our hands. But this next topic is just going to be very brief. Very brief indeed. It's talking about why Indiana versus Ohio State will be the game of the year. The Hoosiers and Buckeyes take the field this Saturday to participate not only in the Big Ten Championship game, but in the game of the year. These two teams are top 2 in Football Power Index, in FEI, in S&P Plus, and all other power ratings. These teams are the unanimous top 2. And they face off. And the spread is Ohio State minus 4.5 or minus 4, depending on where you look at it. A lot of these power ratings say Ohio State should be favored by 1, or it should be a pick'em. These teams are both top 10 in points per play offensively and points per play allowed defensively. Indiana has the 5th best offense, 3rd best defense, 12th best special teams unit per ESPN's efficiency, Ohio State has the 4th offense, 2nd defense, and 128th special teams unit. These are 2 of the best coaches in the sport with 2 of the best rosters from a college angle. Ohio State has the best roster as of right now from an NFL angle, I would say. And Indiana's is very underrated from an NFL angle. Mendoza is a first-round pick. Pons is definitely a day 2 guy. If someone, for whatever reason, does not care about his height, he could totally be a first-round guy. He plays well there. And they have players on that defensive front and that offensive line and at receiver that scream day 2, day 3 guys. The developmental job, Ohio State's their slogan, almost said slang for whatever reason, but I guess it is kind of, in their own culture and language. Their slogan in Columbus is developed here, and they meet that requirement. They do a good job developmentally, they do an elite job, and they recruit at a high level. The talk about developed here in Bloomington, Indiana. They also do an elite job at developing, and I cannot wait to see Bryant Haynes versus Brian Hartline and Ryan Day, Mike Shanahan and Chandler Whitmer versus, Matt Patricia and Tim Walton. I can't wait to see Indiana's offensive line versus the Ohio State defensive front that few, if any, have been able to move consistently. I can't wait to see Indiana's corners against Ohio State's receivers or Ohio State's corners against Indiana's receivers. I can't wait to see how Julian Sayin and Fernando Mendoza will play. 2 of the best teams, and you can see it on these stats here. It's a 50-50 game per ESPN's FPI. These are teams that are amongst the top in pass defense, in run defense, in power ratings. It's absolutely incredible. These are elite teams with NFL quarterbacks, strong defensive lines, a physicality to them that very few teams in college football right now can match or can boast about, and they have elite coaches. The only coach that is in the realm of these 2, I think, is Kirby Smart right now down in Georgia. And as for the quarterbacks, the only quarterback or quarterbacks in the league of these 2, probably Ty Simpson on a good day, Dante Moore on a good day. The D lines that are in a league with this, Texas Tech, all of those teams are teams that can either win it all or are very close to, and we have 2 of them, the top 2 in power ratings, unanimously facing off on Saturday. It is an absolute festivity. It is the game of the century. It means so much, despite what some may say. Indiana has a chance to show that they could be the big, bad team in the Big Ten, and that Cignetti is the best staff in the Big Ten. And Ohio State has a chance to show that they are, just whether by hook or by crook, by struggle session or by quick, carpet bombing, they are retaking the Big Ten. It's going to be the game of the year, and everyone better tune into it. Or else you're not a true college football fan. You're just a poser. Okay, speaking of, things to be excited about, apparently Billy Napier, this is not something to be excited about. Apparently Billy Napier just got hired by James Madison, so that's pretty cool. But I want to talk about a few things here. I want to talk about why BYU versus Texas Tech will be the future Big 12 rivalry. Had a little bit of a cough there. My apologies, but this has been a blast of a stream, guys. It's been an absolute blast of a stream. Complete blast. So, let's get to it, and let's continue. And this is more Big 12 talk, but I encourage you to stay around. I know we're primarily a Big 10 audience here, want to include other conference audiences, but think about it this way. Those great competitive rivalries? We have one when you think about these great competitive rivalries in college football, my apologies there, Oregon, Ohio State's budding, and you see it on Twitter. I don't quite know if Chris Henry Jr. has flipped yet. I'm actually going to check that right now. I imagine he has not flipped yet. But let me just check really quickly. Make sure. Nope. He is crystal balled to Oregon, though, but he's not officially flipped yet. Where that whole conversation has Ohio State fans and Oregon fans wanting to kill each other. We've seen this with Alabama, Georgia. I believe firmly that BYU Texas Tech is going to be the Big 12's Oregon versus Ohio State and Alabama versus Georgia. It is going to be that competitive rivalry between two top-end programs that are fighting to have respect and to dominate at the national level. Both teams spend, evaluate, and coach at a high level. I think Utah could be included in this triangle of teams where the Utes, the Cougars, and the Red Raiders do all these things at a very high level, and all it would take is large NIL investment for them to really play and function more like an SEC or Big Ten program just in the Big 12 conference. I would need to do a little bit more research into Utah to determine whether or not this is the case or even could be the case. But based on what I have read, based on what I have seen, and based on the words in college football, like the word on the street, BYU is they are growing their investment. They are pouring into their football program. And Texas Tech has been doing this now for about a year. So this is the future Big 12 rivalry that we're going to be talking about. Maybe the holy war between the Utes and the Cougars. Maybe it's going to be a rivalry between all three. I didn't want to leave Utah out because I have tremendous amount of respect for what Whittingham is doing. They've actually signed a good amount of blue chippers, high-end top 100 players, especially on the O-line in this class, and they have a proven process. But I think that BYU and Tech are spending more. We know that Tech is one of the top spenders in football. They've made it very clear that they want to recruit at a high level. It seems like BYU, while maybe not to the same degree, they've promised an additional 10 to 15 million in NIL on top of revenue sharing for the Cougars. Kalani Sitake is about to be one of the highest paid coaches in America. We know Joey McGuire just got an extension. The financial backing that both these schools have. For BYU, it's the Mormon Church and Mormon businesses. And for Texas Tech, it's oil money. Very local support from businesses and from companies that maybe have local origins but operate at a national and even worldwide level are backing these teams. And I have a tremendous amount of respect for Sitake, a growing respect for Joey McGuire. The fact that these two teams are playing in the Big 12 championship game should not overshadow the fact, no matter the result, no matter what happens in the playoff, that I think these two teams are going to face off again and again and again in the coming years. You never know. And maybe this prediction will totally fall off a cliff, but Sitake's been extended. Joey McGuire's been extended. Both have done a great job this year. Texas Tech is guaranteed to be in the playoffs. BYU needs to win this game to get in. I think this is a competitive rivalry that is bubbling to the surface right now. Jay Hill and Sheil Wood, the defensive coordinators at BYU and Texas Tech respectively, are masterminds that have revolutionized their team's defenses. Of course, with help from the portal, especially with Sheil Wood, but Wood has had success before with Willie Fritz. So his success before this year and what he's done this year prove that he is a great defensive mind. And what Jay Hill has done at BYU in such a short period of time is also impressive. What wins championships? Defense wins championships, Sam. Of course. So it helps that these teams have figured out the defensive side of the football, and this is another area where I could also point at Utah and give a nod to them with Morgan Scalley as their defensive coordinator. Along with Utah, too, you got the elite scouting that BYU and Texas Tech have. They all evaluate well in high school and in the portal, and they hit there on those players. Think of what Utah did with Devin Dampier and basically that entire offense, and even the true freshman quarterback they have, and the offensive line they have. I mean, my goodness. And think about the players they have on defense, too. Think about BYU. Bear Bachmeier, true freshman, is an upgrade over Jake Retzlaff. Incredible stuff. Think about the entire Texas Tech team, even more so than the Cougars. David Bailey, Romello Height, Jacob Rodriguez, who's been there for a while. Think about their quarterback, Brycen Moore, sticking with him, getting him a better supporting cast by bringing in Howard Sampson and Jacob Ponton as a young phenom at tackle. The scouting that these programs have is only going to give them another leg up in addition to the leg up they have already with their financial backing. They also play in a weaker conference. So part of the reason Utah for a while was super high in metrics, and since then they've come down with Kansas State and Kansas playing them competitively, is because Utah is built like an Big Ten team. Not going to quite say SEC, because almost all the SEC teams that play that well are more talented than Utah. But they are built like some of the better Iowa and Wisconsin and maybe some of the above average Michigan teams we've seen recently, where they win with suffocating physicality and they're annoying to play. In a weaker conference, not like the Big Ten, that can often make you look a little bit more dominant than you actually are. What that also can do, though, is if you keep dominating at that level, that can kind of become a self-fulfilling prophecy. You recruit better, you attract more investment because people see you're really good, but they know you're not at that level, so you then attract investment to get at that level, and eventually after almost cosplaying as a dominant team, like you're a good, great team, but you're cosplaying as a dominant one, you eventually evolve into a dominant one. Tech kind of made the jump from just mediocre to dominant with all their NIL investment. But I feel like with BYU and Utah, they've been cosplaying as dominant teams that have really good resumes, but maybe aren't as dominant as their record or power ratings could initially say. And now with financial backing and continuing their winning tradition, they can rev up and climb that mountain and become better teams in the future. Playing in that weaker conference helps. It helps keep your players healthy. It helps you dominate. It's fun for the fans. And there's some benefits to it. There are. There are also some drawbacks, as we're seeing with BYU, who should be in the playoffs no matter what, but because of the reputation of the Big 12 from the public, they're not. Stupid playoff committee. But I think this can also be an advantage for these teams. And last but not least, briefly, BYU is the 19th best recruiting class. Or no, Texas Tech is the 19th best. BYU is the 21st. I mix those up. But simple enough. They are bringing in highly touted players at certain positions that other Big 12 teams could only dream of having there. Add on top of that, the financial backing that they can use in the portal and to retain their key roster guys, their elite staff, and great coaching, especially on defense. Which program, outside of, again, maybe Utah or maybe Arizona State, if they can get their act together? You know, they had a really rough year this year, but I love Kenny Dillingham. Which program is going to consistently compete with these guys? Because I think as of this year, with what BYU did last year, and again what they're doing this year, and the commitment they have now after Penn State tried to get Satake, and the commitment that Texas Tech has put on the table, and it's completely panned out this year, who's stopping these two from potentially ruling this conference, outside of maybe Utah and even to a lesser maybe Arizona State? This is the future Big 12 rivalry, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but I'm going to call it now and call my shot. Okay, let's talk a little bit about recruiting here. You know, we all love good recruiting, right? Yep. It's time to talk about recruiting. You know what we love here on College Football with Sam? We love graphs. We love numbers. We love shiny colors, that are educational. We don't just have coloring books to show you, although, maybe someone out there loves those. Maybe there's some kids watching that like coloring books, or maybe whatever. Maybe there's someone who likes adult coloring books. Those are pretty cool. But what we love to do is we love to pair colors and great elite graphics with numbers. And I want to thank my graphic designers, Jake and Jack, for putting this together. And also honorable mention to Brycen, who will be returning with us soon to make some graphics, and also Nick. Thank you to my team for making fantastic graphics to help make these shows better and higher quality. We have a recruiting class graphic. Again, think of the colors, the information. These are the recruiting class rankings as of, I think, right now or earlier today. Let me check and make sure they are accurate. They pretty much are. There have been some changes, but not enough to warrant the graphic being totally done. All the placements, for context, are the exact same. LSU and Michigan just lost like a commit each, but that's perfectly fine. Perfectly fine. I want to talk about some of these recruiting classes for just like a few minutes each, and yeah, we'll do that, and then get on with some other things too, for sure. I majored in shapes and got my minor in colors. That's a funny comment. Tennessee won National Signing Day yesterday. The Volunteers shot up in the recruiting rankings from, I believe, the 9th or 8th spot. They were floating around 10 there, and briefly they shot up to 5th, fell back down to 7th, but they are so much closer to the Ohio States, the Alabamas, the Georgias, Oregon, USC, and Notre Dames of the world than they are to, say, Michigan, LSU, Washington, or Miami. They are much closer to that 6 through 1 group, or I would really group it probably 8 or 9 through 1. They're all pretty close together. Then you get kind of a drop-off a little bit at Miami, another little bit of a drop-off for Michigan, and then again with LSU and again with Washington. That's where it really begins to tail off there. The Volunteers added a few key players to what was already a fantastic recruiting class, highlighted by Faison Brandon at quarterback and Tristan Keys, the number 1 overall wide receiver. But they added Legend Bay, wide receiver from Texas. There's an interesting story with him about how apparently he doesn't want to go there, but his parents want him to go there. As of right now, he is signed with Tennessee. It looks like he'll at least be enrolling there. They also added a defensive lineman out of the North to their program. A defensive lineman from, I believe it was Connecticut, if I'm not mistaken. In Carter Gooden, not Connecticut, but Massachusetts, rather. They added Carter Gooden, who originally was committed to UCLA and then signed with Tennessee. That was a really big get, 6'4", 260 pounds, as a prototypical edge player, big, physical, top 100 guy with a 95 overall rating by 24/7 Sports, with 28 total commits and a total of 2 5-stars, 14 4-stars, and 11 3-stars, and an overall rating of a 291.19 in terms of points. I love this Tennessee recruiting class to bring Tennessee probably their most successful season since 2022. Ever since that year, final year of the Alex Golesh era at offensive coordinator, now the head coach at Auburn, they haven't really been the same offensively, and they haven't been the same overall in terms of power ratings and how good of a team they fielded. 2024, it felt like maybe they were a really high caliber team, but they had an easy schedule, and that was exposed by Georgia and Ohio State, really. This is Tennessee's highest ranked recruiting class since 2015, with an ace quarterback, an ace wide receiver. In totality, they have 10 defensive linemen in this class. That has been an issue for them this year, where they lost a lot from last year up front. They brought in a lot of guys, and they have 3 offensive linemen, 3 receivers total. Tristan Keys and Legend Bay highlighting that. Very optimistic with Tennessee from a roster standpoint after they've had a rough 8-4 year. Josh Heupel is still secure with the program, and he signs his best recruiting class as a Tennessee head coach. Great things happening in Knoxville. For a loser on National Signing Day, Ohio State lost Caden Dixon-Wyatt to USC. It sounds like they're going to lose Chris Henry Jr. to Oregon. And they also lost Legend Bay, receiver, quarterback, running back, and an offensive athlete to Tennessee. All of this has to do with Brian Hartline. Ohio State's wide receiver class in totality is fine. You're not going to see the effects of that until probably 2027 at the earliest, with Smith coming back next year, and they have a lot of talent in that room that Hartline's developed. And Ohio State's recruiting class this year already started out as a bit of a disappointment. They had a lot of flips late that helped them at least meet the usual Buckeye standard. A lot of them. A few of them, for example, they had a cornerback flip to them. They had Jay Timmons flip to them. They were able to get a lot of guys who were not evaluated properly by the recruiting services. So Sam Greer quickly shot up the board. Sincere Johnson shot up the board. Curry Wilder, a good get from California at edge, he shot up the board. Emmanuel Ruffin, they flipped from Colorado. For example, they were able to get Jordan Thomas and Kamari Bing. And then they also flipped Caden Gebhardt from Clemson. They actually flipped him on signing day. But overall, with Dixon Wyatt going to USC, a conference competitor, and Chris Henry Jr., at least as of what the recruiting services are saying, likely going to Oregon, an even bigger conference competitor. There's a bit of a rivalry brewing between Oregon and Ohio State, not in the Auburn, Alabama, or Michigan, Ohio State sense, but in the Alabama, Georgia sense, a competitive rivalry of titans. That really is a sting. I think Ohio State is completely fine. The defensive recruiting class is absolutely phenomenal. So, for context, they have 7 defensive line players, 6 DBs, 2 linebackers, and their offensive line class is phenomenal too. This is their best offensive line class since Greg Studwara was a recruiter. Fry was a terrible recruiter, hit and miss in other aspects. I think it's already been shown this year that Tyler Bowen and Marcus Johnson and that offensive line staff are not only better at developing, I would say, than Justin Fry is, but they're much better recruiters. I mean, Greer should be a 5-star at offensive tackle. Riley's a good interior player there. And they have some other guys who are meant to be like redshirt players who will take a few years to get there, but ultimately through Ohio State strength and conditioning, they'll get there. If Chris Henry ends up flipping, which is likely, they'll only have 3 receivers. Most of them will be lower level players. One in Guilford will be a higher level player that should only take a year or maybe 2 to get acclimated and play well. It would be pretty disappointing by Hartline standards, but given the timing of his, announcement that he's going to be the head coach at USF, it's an okay receiver class. Running back, they have Favor Akee, but they're already very young at running back, so I don't think it matters that they just have one and he's a fringe 4-star. Quarterback, they're just taking a body for depth purposes. It's a really good defensive class and lines of scrimmage class, and defense wins championships. Ohio State has lacked depth on the offensive line for quite some time, whether this year, last year, 2023. The last time they really had an apex offensive line for a full year was 2022. They would have had it last year if not for injuries. I think this class can be the start of them having apex O-lines again every single year. Run blocking, pass blocking, they get injured, oh, don't care, we can just plug in another guy. They haven't had that in a while. And I think going forward they can have that. And this is a great defensive class. But from a National Signing Day angle where it looked like they could have been flirting with a top 3 class, they are now going to be the 6th best class at best. And if they lose Chris Henry Jr. to Oregon, Oregon will earn the best overall class from a point standpoint and from a quality standpoint, and Ohio State would probably fall to 9th, could even fall to 10th. So despite having a great class and Ohio State being fine, and I think there's a lot of overreaction surrounding this class, they are still a signing day loser. And I think what this goes to show is, I think recent history and money matter a lot more than they used to. And that hurts Ohio State because they're the top program historically. So they can't maximize that edge as much as you used to before there were official payments. And also what you have to remember is Hartline is the GOAT as a position coach and was their best recruiter. And losing him with early National Signing Day, which wasn't always a thing in football, is especially a hard hit. Would not be shocked if Ohio State has a better recruiting class next year. And again, they develop better than a lot of teams in the top 10 do. So Ohio State will just be fine. It's just a little bit of a disappointing class in terms of what Ohio State's used to. But that's going to be more of the future with more teams competing for that number 1 overall class. It's just fine. Like, no one's Nick Saban, Alabama. No one will be. Ryan Day doesn't have to be in order to win multiple national titles and have Ohio State be the number 1 program. Just doesn't. USC, I mean, talk about an absolute winner in the recruiting world. USC maintained the number 1 recruiting class. And they are going to, I don't know what you call it, but they're good. I mean, they're really good. And how do I put this? Is the highest quality class? No. But was it needed? I think so. Yes. So this, by all accounts, in my mind, was not just a successful class, but a historic class for USC. USC signed their best class in the college football playoff era. And along with rival Notre Dame, they were really the only school to not have signing day drama, where Notre Dame just signed all 27 of their commits, and USC signed all 35 of them on day 1 of National Signing Day. Early National Signing Day, technically. It's the best class for the Trojans in the playoff era. They have 1 5-star, 21 4-stars, 13 3-stars with 35 commits. Lincoln Riley, man, oh man. Man, oh man. They are not playing around. They are being the aggressor in every way, in terms of on-the-field play, in terms of off-the-field coaching and development and chasing that, and in terms of recruiting. You know what USC is building for? They're building for a national title, and they're building for Big Ten titles and consistent playoff appearances. How do I know that? They have 7 offensive linemen. 7 in this class. And in theory, they could return probably all but maybe 1 or 2 of their starting offensive linemen next year, which was really good this year. They have 8 defensive linemen, 6 defensive backs, 3 linebackers, 2 tight ends, including the 3rd overall tight end in America in Mark Bowman. They have 6 receivers, including Caden Dixon-Wyatt, who they flipped from Ohio State, the 6th best receiver in America, 6'2", 180 pounds. And they have a quarterback as well, in Jonas Williams, who is nearly a top 100 player from Illinois. So just quality over quality over quality. They have the number 1 offensive tackle in Kenyi Pepe, 6'7", 320 pounds, the number 3 tight end in America, the 6th best wide receiver, the 3rd best interior defensive lineman. the 5th best linebacker, the 10th best receiver, the 10th best edge in Luke Waffle from New Jersey, or maybe it's Wafel, the 10th best interior defensive lineman in Tomuhini Tupui from California, the 7th best corner in Albert Hill from Ohio. I think he wanted to go to Ohio State initially. The 6th best running back in Deshaun Redo from California. The 9th best quarterback in Jonas Williams from Illinois. 5th best interior offensive lineman. 12th best running back. 25th best interior defensive lineman. Just 4-star, 4-star, 4-star. A lot of people have criticized USC's quality in their class for, again, 35 commits. Seems pretty excessive. But they have 22 blue chippers. That is more blue chip players than Oregon, Alabama, Ohio State, Tennessee, Texas, Miami, Michigan, LSU. It's more blue chip recruits than any other class has except for Georgia, Notre Dame, and Texas A&M. That's it. That's it. And what this means is with this big of a sample size, you will get busts. You will have people transferring out no matter what. It's too big. There's too much of a sample for everything to pan out here. But you will also have sort of a staggered effect where some of these guys will redshirt. So now the class is kind of split into two different categories of eligibility. You will have depth if you're able to retain a lot of these guys and develop them well. And some of these guys will start day one next year or be contributing players because, again, with that large of a sample, you're going to get more results on the tails of a bell curve, probably. So I would not be shocked if some of these signees contribute immediately next year to a team that should return the majority of its roster, potentially return its starting quarterback. The only two players that I know are gone from that roster besides the seniors are likely the top two wide receivers. And they might be able to return one of them. I'm pretty sure Mekhi Lemon is gone. And pretty sure Jacoby Lane is gone. But if they can return a lot of that roster and get these guys in and develop them, remember, strength and conditioning coach Jermaine Carroll, who is an upgrade over Benny Wiley, he was only there for really the summer. They fired Wiley after spring. So this is really going to be his first full season of getting with these players and developing them. It's going to be Lynn's third year. There's some new staffers USC added where it's going to be, their second year or so. And this class just gives me, especially since they held on to these guys. Last year, they had a strong start, but they couldn't hold on to them. This year, they held on to all the players they earned pretty much, except for Xavier Griffin, who is at Alabama, another top-end program. And that's what I mean. I said another top program as if USC is a top program. And they are. They may not be there here and now, but I can pretty safely project this is going to be a top program in the Big Ten and in college football moving forward. And this class is a big part of it. Ignore that mistake of transition. Now we're going to talk about Oregon's class. This recruiting class will win Oregon a national title. I'm pretty confident in that. Not this class directly, as in it's going to be solely because of this class that Oregon will win its first title ever under Dan Lanning, but because of the coach Dan Lanning is, because of the staff he's assembled, because of their prior recruiting classes, and in addition to all of that, this recruiting class being the icing on the cake, in the next 5 years, which by then this recruiting class will be entirely cycled out, they will have won a natty. They recruit at too high of a level. They get too many alien players. They do too good of a job developing, especially on the lines of scrimmage. And they're too fundamentally sound and too passionate and too well-funded to not win a title. They have not even added Chris Henry Jr. yet, and it sounds likely that they will. Not confirmed yet at the time of this recording. Maybe by the time this video is uploaded, it will be confirmed. But Oregon, as of right now, has the number 2 recruiting class. They are the only team, along with USC, to have 300 or more points in a recruiting class. They have 4 5-stars, which is the most of any team this year, tied with Notre Dame and Alabama. And their average rank per recruit at a 93.29 is only lower than LSU's with a 93.69. And if they add Chris Henry Jr., I could easily see them regaining that top spot. If not, they have 6 more commits than LSU, and I imagine they'll do a better job developing than Lane Kiffin's LSU. So I would consequently say they have the highest quality class for, keep in mind, the second year in a row. And unlike last year, where they had very few commits, this time they have more than 20. The only player that is not signed yet is wide receiver Jalen Lott, 5-star. And it sounds like, according to what Oregon people are saying, that he'll sign tomorrow. And they're just working out NIL dealings and stuff. Probably wants a guarantee that, he's going to get paid and taken care of there, even if they flip Chris Henry Jr. And Chris Henry Jr. is crystal balled to flip to Oregon. This class is really fantastic. And add on top of that Oregon will always be active in the portal, and most of the time always get the top players in the portal. They have 4 defensive linemen, 2 linebackers, 6 defensive backs, a tight end, 3 receivers, could be 4 if they keep Lott and add Chris Henry Jr. They have 3 offensive linemen, a running back, and a quarterback. Anthony Jones is the 5th best edge in America. Jet Washington is the best safety in America. Chris Henry Jr. would, in my opinion, be the best receiver in America. I know Tristan Keys is rated higher than him. Emmanuel Iheanacho is the 2nd best interior offensive lineman. Kendra Henderson is the 2nd best tight end. Tommy Tofi is the 3rd best interior offensive lineman. Tredarian Ball is the 4th best running back. They have 7 players from California, 2 from Florida, 2 from Texas, and 1 each from Alabama, Colorado, Hawaii, Idaho, Maryland, Nevada, New York, North Carolina, Oregon, and South Carolina. Oregon recruits at a national level, and they have one of the biggest budgets in the sport, but that's talked about too much. What isn't talked about enough is the fact that under Lanning, they set the record for most NFL draft picks in a single season. The fact that they reload on the O-line and D-line no matter who leaves. The fact that this year they have several freshmen stepping up in major ways that have gotten better as the season's gone on, who have come on strong the minute they stepped on the field. Think of the running backs. Think of wide receiver Brycen Moore when healthy. And think about how they've developed Dante Moore into a possible round 1 pick 1 quarterback, or at least a first-round quarterback. This recruiting class, with Lanning's development and oversight, and with the staff he has assembled and will continue to assemble as his own coaching tree forms, and with prior recruiting classes that Oregon is bringing in and will bring in, they will be a part of Oregon's first national championship under Dan Lanning. That much I know, and I'm confident in. Michigan's recruiting class. What do I think about it? Michigan, you could say, much like their rival Ohio State, was a loser on National Signing Day. They did lose a player in Zion Robinson to Stanford at wide receiver, which just, that hurts to lose to Stanford. And they also lost a defensive end to South Carolina. Highly touted defensive end. South Carolina has an okay class. They have a budget. That one isn't as surprising since that player was from South Carolina. They have the 11th ranked recruiting class, but 2 players in the top 10 overall, in running back Savion Hyder and in defensive end Carter Meadows. And they have 4 players from Texas, 4 from Virginia, 3 from Illinois, 2 from Georgia, 2 from Ohio, 3 from the District of Columbia. They're recruiting in states that have really good, proven high school football. And that's impressive. That's something to take pride in. For Michigan, again, like Ohio State, it is a loss what they suffered on National Signing Day. You would have preferred they kept those 2 players instead of losing both and adding one of Georgia's receivers. You would have preferred that. However, in the same way I said about Ohio State, that this class, while especially if Chris Henry Jr. flips, is going to be a little bit disappointing, it's not a failure. And from the talent side, Ohio State's going to be totally okay. From the talent side, Michigan's going to be totally okay. 13 4-stars, or 12 4-stars now, 2 5-stars, 12 3-stars. And the Michigan Wolverines, when you look at their class, 2 quarterbacks, 2 running backs, 3 receivers, 5 offensive linemen, 2 tight ends, 5 defensive linemen, including some of the better defensive tackles that will probably, some of the better defensive tackles in high school football, 3 linebackers, 3 defensive backs, and a special teams player, a kicker in Micah Drescher from Illinois. And again, you have Carter Meadows, who is a top 10 overall player, according to 24/7 Sports Team Talent Composite. He is the 6th best player, number 2 edge. Savion Hyder is the 8th best player, number 1 running back. Those are guys who are so talented that they could immediately contribute next year, where Michigan would have a hyper deep running back room, and Michigan loses a lot on the defensive end, but they probably don't have a player right now with the upside of Carter Meadows. So if they can develop better next year than they did this year, they could really take advantage of some new life in that defensive line group. It is a class that I think is very underrated depending on where you look. There is some to be desired from. I think Michigan probably could have done a better job recruiting at linebacker and maybe recruiting at receiver, but how well you're going to recruit at receiver when you don't have the production and the offense was a mess in big games. It's the same thing I'm going to say with Ohio State. Ohio State, yeah, is recruiting better than Michigan, but that's expected. It's a good class. Do you want better? Yes, but this is also the new era of NIL, where you are within striking distance, recruiting-wise, of a lot of teams in front of you. So signing 2 top 10 overall players, which that's the most top 10 overall players in a given class. No one else has more top 10 players in a class than Michigan. They're the only one with 2 top 10 players in the 2026 recruiting cycle. There's a lot that's to be liked about this recruiting class. What is going to be the backbreaker for Michigan recruiting is going to be their development. Can they develop these players? And then through that, if they do develop them, they'll recruit better because different players will see that, and then they'll want to come to Michigan even more than they already do. Bless me. There. I'm starving, by the way. Absolutely starving. Yeah, we are absolutely starving. But good news is we only have one more thing to get to, and then we'll be on out of here. And that is Brian Hartline. That's what we're going to talk about now. That is what we will be discussing, is Brian Hartline. And then after that, I'm going to go eat. And then there are a few more things that I knew due to time constraints I wouldn't be able to do when I started this live, but I have the graphics ready and I have the energy and the passion to record them. So I'll probably record those separately. Those will each probably be, with the exception of maybe one or two, a longer video. But that's A-okay. Or maybe I'll even go live again tonight, and it will be like a bonus live show where you can ask me some questions while I talk about this stuff. But USF hires Brian Hartline away from Ohio State to be their next head coach after Alex Golesh departed to be the head coach at Auburn. This, firstly, is a fantastic hire by USF. Hartline has recruited Florida before. He has a whole receiver pipeline called the South Florida Express. He's done a phenomenal job as the receivers coach, a good job as the offensive coordinator. He's a leader of men, a developer of men. Fantastic hire by USF. I have no idea why other programs didn't take a look at Hartline. Good for USF for taking the risk there. Is it guaranteed to pay off? No. Am I going to give Hartline benefit of the doubt because I love him and think he's phenomenal as a receivers coach? And at that level, he could probably parlay that into being a great G5 head coach. I'm absolutely going to go on a limb and take that risk there and not really think much more about it. For Ohio State, this hurts, and it really hurts in the interim, because now you have to find the new receivers coach, and while you can still sell players on your brand and sell elite wide receivers on your brand and history and development and the elite coaching you have, it's just not going to be the same. Because Hartline is the greatest position coach of all time. Seriously. He's the greatest position coach of all time. And understandably so, when you are that, the identity of a program's success at the position that coach is coaching at is made more about the coach than you. Especially in the modern era where history matters like less than it ever has from a program standpoint. Why else is Texas Tech able to recruit at the level they are? What about Oregon? You get my point. As long as you have funds and great coaching, history can be completely nullified in a lot of different aspects. Also, there are more programs competing for that top recruiting spot. It used to be that really there was always this understanding that it would be Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia when Kirby Smart came around, Clemson when Sweeney was winning often and it was replicated year over year over year. It really was Alabama and everyone else. And some SEC teams occasionally would compete, but really the only ones chasing that every year or even capable of chasing that every year was Alabama, Georgia, and Ohio State in like that tier 1B for recruiting. Now you have maybe 10 programs, and if this parity continues and the lawlessness we have continues, it maybe could even be extended to 15 that will be competing year in, year out for that number one spot. Ohio State being one of those. Towards the top, of course, with a lot of money, with an elite staff, with great recruiters, and a wonderful history and great development. But again, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot more competition in the history aspect, which used to be huge, and I think Ohio State does lean on a lot. That's why Ryan Day mentioned that in his call to Chris Henry Jr. that, hey, we have a ton of first-round receivers in the league and Oregon doesn't. That call, like 5-10 years ago, would have meant a lot more than it does now. Where now the simple retort can be, well, that was Brian Hartline, and Oregon is a new school that can pay me a lot of money and that has gotten receivers drafted, not in the first round, but I could be the first there. So it hurts a lot in the immediate future because recruiting this year, that's a terrible snap. I'm never really good at that. It's immediately affected. Next year and beyond that, recruiting probably won't be affected as much, but I imagine Ohio State was able to get receivers at a bit of a discount or not have to be the top payer and player too. Because Hartline was that good, and it was obvious to anyone. I mean, I even said it, I'm a Michigan guy, but I love excellence. I love excellence more than I love my own school. And Hartline, if I were a receiver, and I am, I'm a Michigan fan, I'm a student, I bleed there. If you all of a sudden transform me into an elite receiver, and Hartline's at OSU, I'm going to OSU. It's an absolute no-brainer to go there. And that's not quite the case anymore. I still think it'd be a recommended destination. I would even say it'd be better to go to Ohio State as a receiver now than Michigan, for example, and many other schools, but you're no longer the obvious no-brainer top, and you'll have to adjust to that. But I think Ohio State's going to be great and perfectly fine in the future. I ultimately am more of a Ryan Day believer than anything else. I think Day is their best or second best head coach in the modern era, in the 21st century, depending on who you ask and what your metrics and basis for that are. I think Day is like absolutely phenomenal and a wizard and a total college football junkie and a total developmental junkie and a great man. And I think he has high character. So Ohio State will ultimately be fine. And if you don't believe me, just look at some points that I've brought up on the screen here. Day right now is on a 26-2 run over the past 2 seasons, Ryan Day has a winning percentage that is approaching right now the 90s, which again is it's crazy that it's approaching that high. He is an 82 and 10 record with three. I genuinely forgot they didn't appear last year. 3 Big Ten championship game appearances with 2 Big Ten titles, a national title. He has a 5-3 record in the college football playoff, and they've produced first-round pick after first-round pick, plenty of day 2 guys, plenty of day 3 guys. It's likely more than not, if you're starting for Ohio State at this point, that one day you will be drafted. Maybe not the highest round, but you'll at least get NFL looks or a look at fall camp. That is how good of a program and operation, a ship that Ryan Day runs. They are the number 1 program in football, and they have the best resume in the 2020s. They also have a great history at wide receiver, and I imagine whether they promote Devin Jordan from within or they get someone else, I imagine they'll have a good enough recruiter there that combined with their history, they'll still get a high caliber athlete at receiver. Maybe the drop-off's only by a little bit. Maybe it's by a good amount. If it is by a good amount, they'll still have wonderful receivers, by the way. Ohio State, I don't even think Buckeye fans realize how dominant their receivers are. I think that might be a spoiled of riches thing, but believe me when I say that if Ohio State just had the second best receiver room in America instead of the best in some years, they are not nearly the team that they ended up being. Like, that is how good those receivers are. It is impressive that Day was able to A, mentor Hartline, and B, keep him as a coach for this long. That is impressive, and it will be an even greater achievement by Day if Hartline then becomes a successful coach. The defense for Ohio State's still fixed. Still. Again, to my example of, if in 2021 and 2022, Ohio State does not have the best receiver room in America by a good margin, more so 21 because 22 suffered injuries, Ohio State could have gone 9-3 in 21 and had a really bad year, if not for the receivers being that phenomenal, even with Stroud. Last year, when they went on that playoff run, and their run game, even with Judkins and Henderson, was very shaky, and their O-line got put in a blender in different games, they could have not won at all and lost 3 games, if not for their receivers. This year, I imagine, like, it's the same thing with any team. Take away their best, and they're much different. Like Michigan in 24, you take away that D-line, they have a losing record. In 23, you take away that D-line, they do not win at all. The point I'm trying to make is most fan bases, every fan base, does not realize how good they have it when they have an amazing position group. I took for granted, tried not to as an analyst, but as a fan, I know I took for granted that Michigan's D-line was absolutely phenomenal over the past 2 years. Now, they did a poor job developing it this year, but even if they did a better job, they wouldn't have reloaded probably because they were just that talented. Ohio State should not take for granted how elite they've been at receiver because, I mean, Jeremiah Smith is a once in a 50 years type player, once in a 20, once 25. You get the point. All I'm trying to say, though, is that the defense is fixed, so the drop-off may not be noticeable to the naked eye because the team is still just as good or close due to the defense being top 3 in points per game and points per play every year. And they have been in those categories every year since 2023. Lastly, this was obviously inevitable. He was never going to stay around forever. Expecting him to was unrealistic and a bit myopic. But now that he's gone, it will be interesting to see what Ohio State is, say, 5 years from now or 10 years from now. I'm betting on the fact, though, they will be more of the same. And if any regression occurs, and regression always occurs, a program is never constantly going up, they fluctuate. I imagine what will happen to Ohio State is like from this, my prediction is that they are still in the national title conversation every year, the Big Ten title conversation every year. They make the playoff every year, or if they miss it, it's like a once-in-a-lifetime thing. What will happen to them is what happened to Georgia when they lost some of those staffers and some of those alien players, where instead of being the clear number one team, they're now just in the hunt. But Ohio State's been that before under Day, and they were that for most of the Urban Meyer era, outside of 14 and parts of 15 when they clearly had the number one roster. Saban even had years like that where, more so than anyone, more often than not, he clearly had the number one team. But towards the end, there were some years where it was like, yeah, that is not the number one team, and they're in the hunt, and that's good enough, and that's going to be the norm in the modern era of college football. So for Ohio State, this does not have much of an impact directly on next season. It has an impact on recruiting, though, and that will show down the line. Ultimately, I think Ohio State is going to be one of the top programs in the Big Ten and in college football down the road. Right now, they're the number one program, and I wouldn't predict them to come off that until I see it, because I think that's kind of playing with, yeah. Anyway, bit of an awkward ending there, but that's okay. All right, everyone. Thank you for coming on the show. I need to go eat, and I need to get these up. I need to do that. So, yeah. Thank you for watching. And to answer a statement from Matthew, I was not saying I wasn't saying they set the record nationally. I meant for the Ducks record, and I think I clearly said that. Like they set their record. They set Oregon's record for players drafted, which I think was 10. So, yeah. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. There will be more content that I have not recorded tonight. Tomorrow, I'll probably record it tonight. It's just not on the live. Yeah, we'll get to that. And as for Penn State, because we didn't really talk about that much, but that segment was meant to be short. Why did I save that for the end? That was probably a pretty poor decision. We'll talk about Penn State's disaster. We'll do that and then get out of here. Okay. So with Penn State, how do I put it? Pat Kraft has got to be fired. He's got to be sacked. There's no other way around this. I'm not saying he's a bad athletic director, but he made an awful decision. Not the decision to fire Franklin. That's not what I'm talking about. But he made the awful decision to fire Franklin without a backup plan, without a clear plan of what to do. And he never formulated one. And that's insane. I think Franklin's overrated. I think a lot of people are gassing up Franklin because they want to see Penn State suffer. I think a lot of big fan bases like Franklin because he was their puppet on a string. He could never beat them. So they want to see him succeed because, yeah, that coach, he's going to succeed at Virginia Tech by their standards, but he'll never actually be a threat. He's just, to Ohio State or Oregon or Alabama or Georgia, he's an empty suit. All he's doing is ensuring that there's another top program who can't beat them. It helps them stay at the top. You get my point. I think there's a lot of that in the national space with saying Franklin should have been fired. They just wanted Penn State to stay cute, and since they tried to level up and failed, they really want to, dig it in there that Penn State shouldn't be anything and they don't deserve anything better. That's not true. The decision to fire Franklin was totally justified. If you lose to Northwestern or UCLA with that talent, you suck. You suck. You're terrible. Maybe not as an individual person. I don't think Franklin's terrible as a person. He's done a lot of good things. Maybe not as an overall coach or your overall achievement. Don't think that's fair for Franklin either. But in that given season, and as a leader, you failed. You failed. Penn State had a top 10 roster with several future pro players who will probably get drafted at a discount due to how bad this season went and who will have success in the league. And lost to UCLA, who has no talent, whose coach is now a coach at the FCS level, who got destroyed by Ohio State and Indiana, who Penn State should have been this year. They should have been at that level. And then you lost to a Northwestern team who David Braun's a good coach, but they're 6-6 and don't have much talent either. And you should have beaten Oregon too. They were at your house. They're new to the Big Ten, and Penn State was able to, in theory, match them NFL player to NFL player wise. And if they developed at the same level, they would have. And they didn't. That's all on Franklin. All of that stuff's on Franklin. All of it is. So I don't want to hear this whole thing, Franklin deserved better than Penn State. Franklin put them in this spot. Because if they kept Franklin, the locker room probably would have lost it, and they would have had just as bad of a year, and that would have affected recruiting. That would have put Franklin on the hot seat. And while the damage wouldn't be as bad as it is now, I think that Penn State still would have had very negative ramifications for it. Franklin still wouldn't have been the guy. They would have never been a threat at the top, and they would have been stuck in a permanent purgatory. Just would have been. And they wouldn't be taken seriously. This is all still the case now, but that's because there are two people at fault here for this disaster. There is James Franklin, and then there's Pat Kraft. And what Pat Kraft did is Pat Kraft, when James Franklin, kicked back and drank a beer and said, yeah, I'm going to mess all of this up and I'm going to make it terrible for Penn State. I'm going to show everyone that I don't just lose all the big games, but I do not have the strongest culture in the world, and I am not the best coach in mind, and I can break my entire locker room, and I myself can get broken. And what Pat Kraft does is he takes up his cup, and he says, I'll raise you one. I will raise you one, and I will destroy this entire football program by annihilating its recruiting class, by refusing to hire the interim head coach when all else fails, therefore probably sowing distrust between the athletic department and myself and the coaching staff and the players. And I will refuse to hire coordinators, even though Hartline wanted the job, probably, and even though Will Stein probably also would have wanted the job, or Glenn Schumann. I will refuse to hire them. I will refuse to hire Bob Chesney because I want a big name, even though a lot of big names probably wouldn't want the job due to Franklin being a big name and being fired, and I'll destroy everything. That is what Pat Kraft has done. So yes, Pat Kraft is probably a bigger villain in this than James Franklin, if we're being honest. But both completely messed everything up. In a season where there were high expectations for Penn State, and they wanted to do what Michigan wanted to do, and Michigan did it. And they wanted to do what Ohio State wanted to do, and Ohio State did it. Penn State got shattered by those expectations. If Penn State never expects to reach this level, none of this happens. And maybe Franklin messes around and gets a big win this year. And maybe this is viewed as one of his better seasons and maybe even his best team. Instead, they go 6-6. And their recruiting class is 149th or 150th with 2 commits. They're probably going to have an exodus in the transfer portal unless they hire Terry Smith or hire a really big-name coach who can have Terry Smith on the staff. And I doubt the latter part's happening. And what you have now is a permanent rebuild. And by permanent, I mean no matter what, there's going to be a rebuild. The roster next year, no matter what, is going to be far worse than this year's roster. It's going to be one of the worst Penn State rosters in a minute. And it's going to have to be from the ground up. There's going to have to be a complete culture reset. Everything's changing. And you're probably going to have a new AD. The only good thing that might come out of this, and The reason I'm not bringing up any candidates or any data is I don't know at this point. Penn State could genuinely promote Terry Smith. They could not have another coach for another month, given how bad Kraft has messed up this search. I don't know what's going to happen at this point. This search has defied all logic. All logic. The only good thing that may come out of this is Penn State's boosters may have to go supernova and get in the habit of going supernova in order to regain Penn State's status as one of the top programs. That's the only good thing that may come out of this. If the donors can somehow get an AD who is basically at their feet, or Penn State hires an AD who is to them what Chris Del Conte is to Texas, and they clean everything up, and it's a long, painful rebuild, but they're all perfectly aligned, and they're resourceful, they have money, they know how to hire good coaches, and they just hit the ground running. That's a good thing that could come out of this. That now, with the hindsight of how bad Kraft has messed up the search, Kraft may have never hired a great coach. He's probably not the guy at this point to bring Penn State their national title. That's the only good thing that could come out of this very awful situation. With that, that's it. I have no idea what Penn State is doing. It's been an abject disaster, and I don't know. I don't know where they're going to go from here. I don't know what the team will look like next year. I don't know what they'll look like 5 years down the road. From complete 180, where you had total stability, you knew what you were getting, to an extreme, almost to a painful extreme. Now you have no idea what you're getting. And that's Penn State's situation. All right, guys, we're done. We're out of here. Thank you for watching. I'll see you guys around very quickly, very soon. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great night.